Hi comic book fans, something a bit different today. I'm going to read you an article from Reader's Digest from 1954. What has this got to do with comics? Well, you will find out. This is entitled For the Kiddies to Read. Okay. It is by T.E. Murphy. It began last December. When a neighbour's child left a couple of comic books at our house, I picked them up casually and began rifling through the pages. I could not have been more startled if I had stepped accidentally on a pair of king cobras. The comic books were loaded with the most depraved pictorial material I have ever seen. Surely these are not sold in my town, I said unbelievingly, to our children. They were. At the corner drugstore, I found counterparts of those two crime comics and dozens more that contained an equal amount of sewage. I said to the druggist, "Do you know the kind of filth you are selling to the children?" He gestured unhappily. "I don't have time to read them," he said. That was my first lesson in apathy. The second was when I spoke to other parents. They shrugged the matter off. Violence, they said, is normal in children. Not until they had seen with their own eyes that it is not violence but abnormality, perversion and decay that these so-called comics purvey did they begin to awaken. And when they awakened, we succeeded together in driving the filthiest of these books off the stands of our city and surrounding towns. It is not enough to talk about these books. People have to be shown. So in order to brief myself for my newspaper writing, I have waded through hundreds of comics in recent weeks. I feel as though I've been trudging through a sewer. Here is a terrible twilight zone between sanity and madness, an area peopled by monsters, grave robbers, human flesh eaters. Here, everything that the human mind has come to venerate and respect through the years of civilization is spat upon and trampled. Here, ordinary murder is mild. Mix it with sex, mayhem, adultery, patricide, matricide, necrophilia, vampirism. Only in the tamest volumes is a character permitted to die by knife or gun. This is the literary offal we have been permitting a few conscienceless publishers to pour into the minds of our children for profit. Here are some example run-of-the-mill plots. Lucy is 10 years old and in the 4th grade. Her parents are not good to her and she would prefer to live with her aunt in a nicer house. Her chance comes when her mother, Mrs. Johnson, starts to elope with a lover. When the two are confronted by Mr. Johnson as they emerge from the house, bags packed, Lucy, watching from a second-story window, picks off her daddy with a .32. The lover runs, whereupon Lucy places the gun in her fainting mummy's hand. Mummy and her lover are later seen in the electric chair. Then, in the finale of Patricide Pays, Lucy is seen smiling and winking because she now lives with her aunt in a nicer house. This one was available for tiny tots on the newsstands in our town until our recent campaign, and may be on your newsstand now. In the same book are also the following stories. 1. A father beats his daughter to death thinking it is her lover. 2. A man is hypnotised into whipping another to death with tyre chains. 3. A man hires a professional killer to knock off his wife's lover. Thus, youngsters can obtain 4 different kinds of intra-family murder in one 10-cent issue. Consider the case of Bloody Mary, also formerly on our stands. Mary chokes her foster mother with a rope, puts the finger on her foster father so that he is sent to gallows for the crime he did not commit. Later, she stabs a psychiatrist and burns his records to conceal her peccadilloes. In another gem entitled I Killed Mary, the name Mary is popular with the purveyors of this literary dung. An inferior boy named Bobby meets a girl named Mary and walks home with her. They stop in a barn because it is raining. Then she is shown reclining on the hay. He makes advances to her, but she laughs at the sissy. Thereupon he picks up an axe and is shown hacking her to death. There is a close-up of the girl's undraped leg as she lies murdered. Later, the boy is shown hanging from the rafters of the barn, a suicide. That book was bought only a few yards from a spot where a 10-year-old girl had been choked to death by a sex pervert just a few days previously. There were many other detailed recipes for murder on the same newsstand. In one, a detailed drawing showed how to rig a gun on a door so that it would fire on the next person to open the door. Another showed how to follow your wife to the subway platform and force her over the edge by pushing people against her. Our current comic is dedicated, frankly, to the kiddies, a revolting yarn reeking with fear. It concerns a wronged husband who makes wife and lover dig their own graves and then kills them. After 10 days, the partially decomposed bodies arise, joined together, and pursue the murderer. He fires his gun into the decaying, maggoty flesh, but it didn't stop. It came groping towards him. The description ends at this point, and a witch says, "I wish I could tell you in detail just what Sharon and her lover did to Larry, but how revolting can one get? We wonder." One cannot emphasize too strongly the role in these comics of cannibalism, the most deeply rooted of all human taboos. When we cannot be appalled at cannibalism spelled out in the last bloody detail, what can shock us? In the day in, day out delineation of this subject, is it fit for small children? Here in a 10-cent book, in a dining room table, which lies a half-eaten human carcass. Here is a half-draped woman, breasts and legs emphasised as usual, and leaning over her is a crone with a cleaver, saying she can hardly wait for the nice, soft, white flesh. Here is a cover showing a monster telephoning for room service and asking not that a bellboy be sent up, not food. He emphasises, but a boy, he is hungry. The prize goes to a crime comic called The Feast of the Ghouls. This concerns a man, while he neither eats nor drinks during the day, grows fatter and more porcine all the time as a result of his nocturnal activity. Periodically, the police are dismayed to find human bodies partially eaten as though by a wild animal. A tidy picture of the corpses in sexes and age groups is shown. Finally, the man invites his niece and his secretary to attend an international gourmets meeting in Italy. When they arrive, they find a table surrounded by fat, hungry-looking men, but nothing on the board. When asked about food, the uncle announces that the niece and the secretary are to be the meal. Do these rather mild samplings surprise you? The odds are that some of these very books are available to your children. If you are shocked, then you have taken the first step in overcoming the moral apathy that grips us. The second is to pass on your feelings to the man who sells these poisonous tidbits. Suppose he sold poisoned candy to your children. What would you do? Well, what a fantastic piece of writing. This is pretty historic stuff because this came out just a few short months after the famous book called Seduction of the Innocent by, I think he's Frederick Wortham, which also came out a few months earlier than this in 1954. And as a result of the Seduction of the Innocent, and partially due to this Reader's Digest article, introduced in 1954 was the Comics Code Authority, which was set up by the American Comic Book Association as a voluntary body for basically approving the content of comics. And it saw the end of a whole range of the horror comics, EC comics in particular, that this article is referring to. Now, the Comic Code Authority, not all comic producers actually joined up. Notably, Dell did not join, and nor did Classics Illustrated. But it was Marvel and DC and Archie Comics and a whole host of others for quite a long period of time were members of the Comic Code Authority. and it was not until 2001 that Marvel dropped out and stopped using the Comic Code Authority. The last ones to drop out were DC, Bongo Comics, and I think Archie Comics, all who dropped out sort of 2010, 2011. And now the Comic Code Authority is defunct. But for nearly 50 years, it upheld morals in comics for the safeguard of our children. I dread to think what the people of 1954 would have thought about what children can now find on the internet. Well, there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of history. Enough said.